Montana Territory, October 1887. The cold bit her ankles as she stepped into the river, skirts clinging to her legs, dusk pressing down like a held breath. Georgia Granger didn't pause, not when the water turned her bones to ice. Not when her boots slipped on a slick stone and she caught herself with a gasp. She crossed the river alone because there was no one left to help her, not anymore. Behind her, across the wide stretch of rushing water, the last of her past burned her father's ranch, her father's name, everything he'd built, sold off in pieces after the bank took it. The lawyer had said there was nothing left. Georgia had stared at the man over his polished desk and walked out without saying a word. Now she had nothing but a worn satchel, 2 letters stitched into the lining of her coat, and the last direction her sister had sent before disappearing 5 years ago. If you ever need to start over, head north. There's a valley past the Groves Venter Range. Look for the old trail and a man named Boone. He owes me. She had not found Boone. She had found snow. And now, as she pushed up the muddy far bank of the river, soaked to the knees and shivering, the last light slipped behind the ridge. Darkness fell fast in these parts. She looked behind her once, at the river she'd crossed, and then ahead into the wild nothing. A lantern flickered in the distance. She froze. It hung from a crooked post, nailed into the side of a weathered barn. Behind it, a cabin leaned into the slope like it was tired of standing. A horse shifted in the corral. Smoke curled from a chimney. She didn't believe in signs, but she walked toward it anyway. Inside the cabin, Leighton Boone had just poured the last of his coffee when he caught movement out the window. He set the tin cup down and stepped to the door, rifle in hand. Nobody came this far up unless they meant to. She stopped just shy of the porch light, dust on her cheeks, hair wet and tangled. Her coat was torn along one shoulder. The river had not been kind. Her eyes met his. "I need a place to sleep," she said. Leighton didn't move. "There's a town 20 miles back." "I know." Her voice cracked, "but I cannot go back." Something in the way she said it held him, not fear, not shame, just finality. He stepped aside. "You can come in, just for the night." She climbed the steps slow, her boots leaving wet marks on the wood. He watched her, noting the way she favored her right leg. When she passed him, she smelled like river water and cedar. Inside, the fire was low but warm. She crossed the room and stood by it, arms wrapped tight. Her skin was pale with cold. He set the rifle down on the table. "Name's Leighton Boone." She glanced at him. "Georgia Granger." He nodded once. "You crossed the river?" "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." He watched her but said nothing. She peeled off her coat, hanging it near the fire. Underneath, her dress was torn and stained. She looked like she had not eaten in days. He stepped into the kitchen and returned with a bowl of stew, then handed it to her without a word. She took it like it was gold. He sat across the room, watching the shadows dance on the log walls, listening to her eat slowly, carefully, like she was not used to kindness anymore. "You said you cannot go back," he said after a while. She didn't lift her head. "I lost everything, the land, my family." "I am not going to beg on a street corner." Leighton nodded. "You got someone looking for you?" "No." She looked at him then. "Do you?" "No." They sat in silence again after that, but it was not heavy. It was the kind that settled between people who had both been through too much to pretend. That night he gave her his bed and slept by the fire. The next morning she tried to leave before sunrise, but he caught her outside, tying her coat tight. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I do not need your charity." "I did not offer charity." She looked up at him, something sharp in her eyes. "Then why did you light the lantern?" He hesitated. "Because I saw someone crossing the river alone at dusk. And I figured they might need hope." Her mouth parted slightly, but no words came. He reached for her satchel. "There's nothing north of here but snow and wolves. You want to find something better, you might try staying put for a spell." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she let go of the strap. Days passed. Georgia stayed. She helped with the livestock, fixed the broken hinge on the barn door, cooked when he was out cutting wood. She was quiet but not cold. Leighton watched her walk the ridge one morning, her eyes scanning the horizon like she was still waiting for something to show up. When she came back to the cabin, he handed her a cup of coffee. "You looking for someone?" he asked. "My sister." She held the cup close. "But I think she may be gone." He didn't ask how. He just nodded. That evening, he showed her how to mend a saddle. Her fingertips brushed his once, and neither of them moved away. Winter came early, snow piled against the cabin walls. The days grew short. They worked side by side, chopping wood, hauling water, fixing fences. She laughed once when he slipped on ice and landed hard. He grinned at her, snow in his beard. "You are not as quiet as you pretend to be," she said. "You either." One night after dinner, he was patching a tear in his coat when he glanced up and found her watching him. "What is it?" he asked. "You are not like I expected." "What did you expect?" Hard edges, short words. "A man who lives up here alone must have something to hide." He met her gaze. "I do, but I would rather not hide anymore." She blinked. Her hand tightened around the cup in her lap. "Me neither." He stood, crossed the room, and crouched in front of her. "Then do not leave." "I have nothing to offer," she whispered. "You crossed a river alone in the dark. You are stronger than you think." "I am tired of being strong." He touched her face gently. "Then let me carry some of it." She leaned into his hand, her eyes closing for just a second. When she opened them, they were shining. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, she kissed him. The morning after the kiss, Georgia woke to the scent of pine smoke and bread baking. She sat up slowly beneath the worn quilt, her breath clouding in the cool air, and listened to the soft scrape of a knife against wood from the next room. The cabin walls held the chill, but there was warmth in the quiet, in the way the fire had been stoked before she stirred. She found her boots by the stove, dry and set upright. Her coat hung from the peg, repaired along the torn seam with thread that didn't match but held true. She stepped into the main room, her hair pulled back loosely. Leighton stood at the table, slicing a heel off the loaf, cooling beside a tin of butter, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, jaw rough with morning stubble. "I didn't mean to sleep so long," she said, voice still low with sleep. "You needed it," he replied, not looking up. "You walk the ridge every day like the hills owe you something." She tucked her hands into her skirt. "Maybe they do." He handed her a plate. "Eat first, then go searching for whatever it is." She took it without a word and sat near the stove. The bread was coarse but warm, and the butter had a sweetness that surprised her. He poured 2 cups of coffee. "I've got to head up the north slope today. Elk broke a fence line. You can come if you're tired of chasing ghosts." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes lingered on the tangle of dried herbs strung above the hearth, the worn saddle bags by the door, the old map nailed to the wall with corners curling in. "I'll come," she said. "But not because I'm tired." He nodded once, and they left together not long after, boots crunching over frost-hardened ground, breath rising in the thin morning air. The trail curved through stands of aspen, their leaves long fallen, branches bare and silver against the sky. Georgia walked just behind him, one hand brushing the wool of her coat where it had been mended. "You said Boone owed your sister," he said after they crested a rise. "Why?" "She saved his wife from bleeding out during childbirth." Her eyes stayed ahead. "He never forgot it." She a midwife. She was everything. When the war ended, she didn't wait for permission, just found folks who needed help and stayed until they didn't. He slowed his pace. "You talk about her like she's dead." "I don't know what she is." Georgia's hand curled around the strap of her satchel. "She stopped writing, that's all I know." They reached the fence where the rails had collapsed under a tangle of hooved tracks and broken brush. Leighton crouched to examine the damage while Georgia stepped back, scanning the woods. "You think they'll come back?" she asked. "Not if we patch it right." He stood. "Hand me that length from the sled." As she passed the post rail to him, their fingers met, rough and cold from the wind. He didn't let go right away. "You ever think about staying?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, her breath catching. "Here, a place like this doesn't work unless someone wants it to." She swallowed. "Everywhere I've ever stayed, something took it away." He nodded, as if that made sense. By midday, they'd braced the rails and stacked stones to keep the lower edge from sagging. She wiped her hands on her skirt and looked toward the distant peaks. "You always live up this high?" she asked. "After the cavalry came through San Angelo, I didn't see much reason to stay south." She turned toward him. "You were a rebel." He met her gaze, eyes steady. "I was 17 and angry, thought I understood the world. And now, I still don't, but I know what matters." He paused. She didn't speak, but her shoulders shifted, breath drawing in slow. They started back as the sky thickened with snow clouds, the wind rising sharp through the trees. By the time they reached the cabin, flakes had begun to fall, soft as ash. That evening, while he cleaned the mud from his boots, she stitched a tear in her glove by the fire. "Do you miss town?" she asked. "No, you? I don't know." She bit the thread between her teeth. "I miss Sundays, church bells, the sound of people who believe in something." He looked up. "You don't believe anymore." "I'm trying." He stood and crossed to her, crouching beside the chair. "You keep walking like the ground's gonna fall out, but it won't, not here." Her needle paused. "Why not?" "Because I won't let it." She didn't answer, but her shoulders eased. He took the glove from her hand and finished the last few stitches, thread sure and even. That night, she didn't sleep in the bed alone. And in the morning, when she stepped outside, the world was white with new snow, and the lantern still hung lit from the post, though dawn had long since broken. She touched it gently and then turned back toward the door where he stood waiting. The snow deepened fast that week, blanketing the high valley in silence. Georgia took to waking before Leighton, stepping into the cold with a bucket in hand, her breath puffing white as she broke the ice on the trough. He never stopped her. Just watched from the window some mornings, his hand curled around a tin cup, the fire behind him casting a long glow across the floor. One morning, she returned with her cheeks raw from wind and found him sitting at the table with a folded cloth in front of him. "I meant to give you this earlier," he said. She dried her hands on her skirt and sat across from him. He pushed the cloth toward her. Inside were 2 brass buttons, dulled with age, and a small compass with its needle still steady. "They were my brother's," he said. "He served with me the first year, didn't make it past Shiloh." Georgia lifted the compass gently. "Why give them to me? I never could part with them, but I think you know what to do with things that carry weight." She looked up. "I won't lose them," he nodded, but said nothing more. That afternoon, they hitched the sled to the mare and rode out to the lower meadow to check the line traps. Georgia sat beside him, wrapped in a second coat he'd found in the trunk at the back of the cabin. She watched the mountains rise around them, their slopes high and quiet. "You ever think about leaving this place?" she asked, her voice low against the wind. "I did," he said. "Year after the war, I made it as far as Kansas City, worked freight for a while, slept in alleys. Got jumped twice." "What brought you back?" He turned toward her, the reins loose in his hands. "A man said something to me once. He said you can run from guilt, but it'll follow you quieter than a dog and bite harder when it catches up. I figured if I stayed out here long enough, maybe it wouldn't find me." She looked down at her gloved hands. "Did it? Not till you crossed that river." At the far end of the meadow, they found the last trap empty, the bait gone and the branch snapped clean. Leighton crouched low, studying the ground. "Bear, maybe," he said. Georgia stepped closer, eyes on the tracks leading into the trees. "You think it's still nearby?" "Could be." She stayed quiet a moment, then asked, "What do you keep out here for?" He straightened, brushing snow from his knees. "Not much. Just enough to remind me I'm still living." That evening, Georgia sat on the step outside the cabin, watching the sky turn soft with stars. Leighton came out and handed her a wool blanket, then sat beside her. The log walls behind them held the warmth, but the air was sharp and clear. "You don't ask many questions," she said. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't give many answers." She tilted her head, watching the breath rise from his mouth into the dark. "You never wondered what I did before I crossed the river?" "I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd tell me. I taught arithmetic in a prairie schoolhouse outside Abilene. 29 children, half of them barefoot, half of them meaner than rattlesnakes." He let out a low sound, almost a laugh. "You don't look like a school teacher." "Well, I was, until a fever swept through and took 6 of them. I nursed them all, but it wasn't enough. After that, the parents blamed each other. The schoolhouse burned down. Nobody owned up to it." Leighton didn't speak for a while, then he said, "That why you came north?" "No," she said. "That's why I stopped dreaming." He turned toward her. "You ever think about starting again?" She looked at him, her face lit faintly by the moon. "I don't know how. You don't have to know how, just have to want it." His hand brushed hers where it rested on the step. She didn't pull away. Later, when they went inside, Georgia paused at the door and looked back toward the river, though it was hidden beneath miles of snow and shadow. Leighton watched her, then said, "That lantern's not just for folks who are lost. What else is it for? For those who are ready to be found." She stepped inside then, and the door shut behind her. The wind shifted late in the night. Georgia woke to its whistle threading through the chinks in the cabin walls, the faint creak of snow sliding off the roof. She rose, wrapped herself in one of the quilts, and moved to the window. Moonlight lit the yard pale as bone, the pines rimmed in frost. Leighton stirred behind her. "You hear something?" "No," she said softly, "just dreaming with my eyes open." He sat up, pushing his hand through his hair. "Trouble," she turned. "Not yet." The next morning brought stillness, the kind that held before a storm. Georgia helped boil lard over the iron stove, while Leighton shaved curls of wood from a pine plank he meant to repair the shed with. The smell of tallow hung heavy in the air, and the windows fogged with heat. "I found something in the root cellar," he said, laying his knife aside. "Old journal. Belonged to the man who built this place. Think his name was Dorsey." She glanced up. "What did he write?" "Mostly about the herd. When they calved, how much salt he had left, but there were 3 pages about a girl who came through one spring. Said she had eyes like burnt copper and carried a scar on her jaw, stayed a week, then rode out before dawn." Georgia wiped her hands on her apron. "You think it was my sister?" "Could be." He leaned against the table. "She would have passed through if she was headed toward Snake River country. That trail cuts west from here." She reached for her shawl. "Show me the journal." He fetched it from beneath the cot and handed it to her. The pages were stiff with age, the ink faded but legible. She scanned the entries, lips moving silently, then she paused. "She came in April," she whispered. "He says she traded a silver ring for a rifle. My sister had a ring like that. It was our mother's." Leighton crouched beside her. "Still think she's gone?" "I don't know what I think." Her voice caught, "But I have to find out." He said nothing, only rested his hand on her knee, firm and steady. By afternoon, the wind picked up, scattering snow from the roof tree and bending the branches low. Georgia packed provisions into a canvas roll, fingers sure, movements practiced. Leighton watched her from the doorway. "I can help you find the trail come spring," he said. "I can't wait that long," she answered. If she made it past here, she might have stayed somewhere warm for winter, a trading post maybe, or a mission. "You won't make it alone in this weather." She tied the roll shut. "I've done harder things." He stepped forward, voice low. "And I've watched you do them, but this isn't pride, it's risk. I'm not asking permission." "I know." He touched her arm. "I'm offering company." She stilled, then looked up. "You'd leave the homestead, for you?" For a long time she didn't speak. Then she nodded once, and he turned to gather the saddle gear. They left at first light the next day. The mare pulled a narrow sled heavy with feed and a canvas tent. Georgia rode Leighton's gelding, her scarf wrapped tight across her face, her eyes sharp against the glare. The trail was only half visible, the old wagon ruts buried beneath drifts. They followed the ridge west, keeping the sun on their left. Snow fell in fits, light at first, then thick as flour. They took shelter beneath a rock overhang that night, the fire small and smokeless, their backs pressed close. "You ever think about what you'd do if you found her?" he asked as they lay side by side. "I used to think I'd scream at her," she said, "for leaving, for vanishing. But now," her breath warmed the wool pulled up over her mouth, "I think I'd just sit down and let her talk." Leighton shifted, his coat brushing hers. "You think she'd come back with you?" "She never stayed anywhere long." "But I'd ask." He was quiet, then said, "I hope she does." She reached for his hand beneath the blanket. He didn't flinch. They moved again at first light, the cold biting through wool and leather. By midday, they reached a half-collapsed way station tucked behind a line of spruce. The roof had fallen in, but the back room still stood, its walls blackened with old smoke. Inside, Georgia found a length of red ribbon nailed to the sill. She touched it gently. "She used to braid her hair with that," she said. Leighton crouched beside the cold hearth. "Fresh ash." "Someone wintered here recently?" "She's close," Georgia whispered. They didn't speak much after that. They bedded down in the back room, the wind howling through the slats in the roof above. Georgia lay awake, watching the shadows from the fire dance on the ceiling. Leighton, she said into the dark, if we find her, and she doesn't want to come back. He turned toward her. Then we go home, together. She reached for him again, and this time she didn't need to say anything more. By the third day west, the snow thinned and the wind calmed, replaced by a hush that settled over the pines like reverence. Georgia rode ahead now, eyes trained on the terrain with a certainty Leighton hadn't seen in her before. She didn't ask which way to go, she already knew. They reached a shallow basin by dusk. The trees opened into a clearing with a low-roofed cabin half sunk into the slope. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, steady line, the kind that came from seasoned wood and an even hand. A mule stood hitched out front, and a patch of herbs grew frozen beneath the porch rail. Georgia dismounted slowly, her hand resting against the gelding's neck as she stared at the door. No footsteps sounded, no creak of hinges, just the soft shift of wind through the firs. Leighton didn't speak. He gathered the reins and waited. Georgia stepped forward and knocked once, her hand steady. A woman opened the door. Her hair was streaked with gray at the temples, braided close to her scalp. Her cheeks were hollowed, her eyes deep-set and wary, but when they met Georgia's, she stilled. "Ellie," Georgia said, her voice low. The woman didn't move. Her hand tightened on the edge of the door. "It's me," Georgia said. "I got your letter. You said if I ever needed to start over." Ellie stepped back slowly and opened the door wider. Inside, the cabin was warm and dim, the fire crackling low in the hearth. A cast-iron kettle sat near the flame, and a single stool had been pulled close, scattered with thread and bits of wool. "You're thinner than I remember," Ellie said, her voice rough from disuse. "You're older," Georgia replied. Ellie nodded once, and still breathing. Leighton stayed by the door, his hat in his hands. Ellie's gaze flicked to him. "You brought someone," Georgia turned. "This is Leighton Boone. He came with me." Ellie studied him a long moment, then said, "Sit." "Both of you?" They did. The kettle whined gently as it heated. "You stopped writing," Georgia said. "I had to," Ellie said. "Wells Fargo Depot in Idaho Falls got raided. They found a list of names in my satchel. I didn't want you traced. You should have told me." "There wasn't time," Georgia stared at the fire. "I looked for you in every place I thought you might be, even rode south once just in case." Ellie's voice softened. "I didn't think you'd come. You told me to." Ellie stood and poured water into 3 chipped tin cups, then handed one to each of them. "You didn't come all this way just to look at me." Georgia's fingers curled around the cup. "I needed to see you with my own eyes." "Know you were alive." Ellie sat down again. "And now you have." No one spoke for a while, then Leighton said, "You've done well out here." Ellie's eyes narrowed. "Hardly. I barter herbs for flour and salt, mend boots, help with births when I'm called, but I'm tired." Georgia leaned forward. "Come back with us, there's room." Ellie shook her head. "Too much shadow behind me. We live in the middle of nowhere," Leighton said. "What shadow's going to follow you there?" "Mine," Ellie said. "I've done things I can't undo." "We all have," Georgia replied. "But we keep going." Ellie's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "You always were the stubborn one." Georgia's voice softened. "I missed you." Ellie looked down at her hands. "I missed you more." It was settled the next morning with no ceremony. Ellie packed what she could fit into a burlap sack, tucked bundles of dried root and a wrapped bundle of letters into the bottom, and tied it shut. She didn't speak much, but there was something unburdened in her movements now, something lighter. They rode back slow, stopping 2 nights beneath sheltering rock and once beneath a stand of bare, quaking aspen. At night, Ellie slept lightly, murmuring in her dreams. Georgia sat beside her once, brushing a damp curl from her sister's brow. "She'll settle," Leighton said from across the fire. Georgia nodded. "She always does. Eventually." When they reached the homestead again, snow rimmed the eaves and the firewood stack leaned slightly to one side. Georgia stepped down from the saddle and looked at the cabin with quiet relief, as though seeing it for the first time. Leighton reached for her hand. "You're home," she turned toward him. "We both are." Ellie stood behind them, her eyes scanning the ridge, the fields, the low barns with their sagging doors. "You built this?" she asked. "I kept it standing," Leighton said. "She made it a home." Georgia's hand tightened in his. Inside, they lit the fire and unpacked what they'd brought. Ellie moved through the room slowly, her fingers brushing the shelves, the window ledge, the faded quilt on the cot. She didn't speak, but later that night she took out her letters and began sorting them by candlelight. Georgia and Leighton stood outside, watching the moon rise over the ridge. The cold was sharp, but not cruel. "I never thought I'd find her," she said. "You did." Georgia turned toward him. "And I found you," he smiled, a rare, open thing that reached his eyes. "You think you'll stay now?" "Yes," she said, "if you'll have me. I've had you since the first time you stepped across that threshold with snow in your hair." She reached up, her fingers brushing his jaw. "Then let's stay. No more running, no more searching." He kissed her slow and sure, the kind of kiss that settles something that's been aching too long. Winter held on for another 2 months, but it passed more gently. Ellie worked in the lean-to, drying herbs and sewing seed pouches for spring. She rarely spoke of the years between, but she laughed more now and began humming again when she worked. She slept through the night. Georgia taught Leighton how to read the ledgers she kept in her neat, slanted hand, and he showed her how to set a trap line that wouldn't freeze shut. They built a new shed together, their hands blistered and raw but proud. One morning in April, just as the first crocus pushed up through the last crust of snow, Georgia stood at the edge of the field, her hand resting on her belly. Leighton came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist, and pressed his chin to her shoulder. "You think this land will hold?" she asked. "It'll hold," he said, "because we will." And it did. Through spring rains and summer heat, through harvest and frost, it held, because they did. Together,